Hey, good morning, everybody. We are recording today's panel. My name is Kate Blossom. I am honored to serve as the president of the West Suburban Philanthropic Network Board, and I'm happy to be helping out a little bit with some of the behind-the-scenes technical today with Susan Newstrom from our committee as well. First, I want to start off with a huge thank you to all of you for being here, for choosing to spend an hour and a half of your morning with us and to share with one another. Also, a very large thank you to our amazing panelists. I'm so excited for this conversation. Kudos to the programs committee, Kathy, for all your hard work in pulling this together, and really just, again, all of you for being here and sharing in the community that is WSPN and our philanthropic network in this area. We have worked really hard since the beginning of the pandemic and the shelter in place to be sure resources are available to you. I know I've talked to many of you one-on-one and had the conversation of how many resources are out there, and not my phrase, but coined by another individual, the fire hose of love of content and information and new ways to fundraise and different ways to fundraise and how it's changed and how it hasn't changed and back to basics. It's a little overwhelming, and so we're really trying with WSPN to offer those resources in a streamlined way. We welcome your feedback and your thoughts as we all try and navigate these new waters. We are excited to continue to bring you programming through the fall, more information on that to come. And be sure when you do complete today's session that you do fill out the survey. We do read those and look for your feedback of what content you want to hear and what's new and changing. None of us know for sure what's next, and we will get through this together and as an organization. And because of you and the incredible work you do, whether you are a direct service professional, an executive director, a fundraiser, or a foundation offering funding, because of you, kids are fed. Because of you, people have homes right now. They're getting job training. They're finding resources to deal with the social injustice movement that is so prevalent and so important right now. That's because of you. And so kudos and thank you for all the amazing work you do. Fight the good fight. Take care of yourselves, because we all need to remember to do that a little bit. Don't stay on Zoom all day long. But again, thank you. Be kind to one another. And thank you again to our panelists. I'm so excited to hear from them today. And with that, I will turn it to Kathy, who will share more about our great team.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually going to turn it over to Susan briefly to give an overview of our Zoom and functionality here.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Little did I know that I would become a Zoom expert, and I would say probably if we were to have this online session a year ago, I would have had to go into detail about Zoom. But I'm going to go on a limb and say everyone has become a Zoom expert. So my instructions will be definitely briefer than if I would have done this earlier, I should say. So here is how this is going to work. I know you have multiple questions that you want to pose to the panel, and we want to make sure that you have that opportunity. So if you look on the bottom of your screen, you'll see question and answer. Please post your questions throughout the panel sessions that you can that we will address towards the end of our session. And if you experience any technical difficulty, put that in the chat. Kate will be monitoring the question and answer. I will be monitoring the chat. So definitely you will get a response. What I will ask you to do is in the chat, because we have quite a few organizations being represented here, if you could in the chat put the name of your organization, that will help our panel to understand who is in the audience, and then we'll be able to share that later with you after the session. So, and if you are not currently a WSPN member, if you would like to put your contact information, if you would want more information, definitely put that in the chat and we will address that also. So I'm looking forward to this session and our wonderful panelists, and I will go ahead and turn that over to Kathy now.
Hi, everyone. We have quite a few people on this call. Last time I checked, we were at about 145 attendees. So I appreciate everyone who's joining us today. I'm seeing a lot of friends' names on the registration. I'm seeing a lot of organizations that I know coming up in the chat. I wish we could all be together in person and give each other hugs, but that will have to wait for a later date. For those of you that I don't know personally, my name is Kathy McCann. I am program officer with the Top for Family Foundation. I've been in this role for about 5 years. The Top for Family Foundation is an independent family foundation. We give in five areas: children's health, child abuse prevention and treatment, youth enrichment, aging in place, and job training and support. Geographically, we give in both Austin, Texas, and the Chicagoland area, and that those are the 2 geographic locations where the family lives. We currently are giving about $1 million in each of those geographic areas. In Chicago, we're giving to about 45 different nonprofit organizations. My background is probably like a lot of yours on the call. I started as nonprofit staff in programs. I've also done a little bit of work in development. I've worked as a grant writing consultant and researcher for nonprofits for the past 10 years. And I've also been in the role of a board member. So probably similar to a lot of you on the call. So before we get started with our panel discussion, I'd like to just take a quick poll of the audience, just to get a sense of who we have in the audience today and what your role is at your organization. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. You can choose multiple options if you fall into multiple categories. Okay. About 85% of people voting. So put your votes in and I'll share that with everyone. All right. So it looks like we have mostly development staff, not surprising, given the topic of this discussion. We have some executive directors, a few board members, a few program staff and volunteers, and a few other. Okay, well, we have a great panel here today. I'm really excited to start this discussion with our panelists. So we have 3 panelists. I'll start with Claire Butterfield. Claire is the current executive director of the Christopher Family Foundation. She's been in this role since 2018. Prior to joining the foundation, she served as the program director at the Illinois Science and Energy Innovation Foundation, initiating their grant making in support of nonprofits that provide energy literacy education to Illinois consumers. Prior to that, she was the founding executive director of Faith in Place, which works with communities of all faiths to connect the teachings of their tradition to practices of care for the earth. She's also practiced tax and transactional law in private practice and at the IRS. Claire is also an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. So welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
Tom Feckman on our panel. Tom is currently a senior program officer of Community Memorial Foundation. Many of you on this call probably know Tom. He's served as a program officer with CMF since 2001, so 19 years in that role. Tom's directed 2 of the foundation's strategic initiatives: the Youth Initiative, aimed at improving health among young people aged 6 through 18, and more recently, the Building Organizational Effectiveness Initiative, aimed at building the organizational capacity of CMF's grantees. Tom has given presentations at local, regional, and national conferences on grant making and nonprofit capacity building. Welcome, Tom. And last but not least, we have Gwendolyn McNutt, who is a regional external affairs manager with Comcast, where she's had more than 25 years of experience. She's responsible for managing community impact initiatives, working with nonprofit organizations, and administering event sponsorship opportunities. Some of her key initiatives include the Comcast Internet Essential Program, the annual Volunteer Day of Service, Comcast Cares Day, and the Comcast Leaders and Achievers Scholarship Program. Gwen currently serves on the board of directors of Chicago Women in Philanthropy and is the current chair of the International Live Events Association, or ILEA, Board of Governors. In 2019, she was awarded a NACE and ILEA Lifetime Achievement Award for her accomplishments within the special events industry. So happy to have you with us today, Gwen. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to our panelists. I'm going to remind our panelists when you talk to take yourselves off of mute, just to give an introduction of your organization, of your giving and grant making programs, as well as your giving priorities. So I'll go ahead and start with Tom.
Great, thank you. And thanks to all who are joining us on this call. As Kathy said, my name is Tom Fleckman, and I'm part of the team at Community Memorial Foundation. We're a private foundation serving 27 communities in the western suburbs of Chicago, 19 in western Cook, and 8 communities in eastern DuPage County. We're a health foundation created from the sale of a local community hospital. So our mission is to improve health, to improve the health and well-being of those who live and work in our 27 communities. And our vision is, together with the community, to transform our region into the healthiest region in the country. We fund in 2 ways. One, through 2 general grant cycles a year, where anyone who feels they can help us move our mission forward can come in and ask us for money. We also have a couple of strategic grant initiatives, one focused around supporting a regional health and human services agenda, which is really focused on increasing access to primary and behavioral health care and reducing the stigma of mental illness. We also have a capacity building initiative, which I direct. So our grant priorities focus on ensuring access to primary and behavioral health care, reducing stigma of mental illness, increasing health equity by reducing the health, social, and economic barriers to optimal well-being, providing for basic needs, including nutritious food, homelessness prevention, and promotion of self-sufficiency, ensuring residents are safe from interpersonal violence, including domestic violence and sexual assault, and nurturing the development of health and human service leaders. So thanks for being on the call.
Great. Gwen, would you like to go next?
Sure. So Gwen McNutt with Comcast. So our foundation is headquartered in Philadelphia, but the area that I handle is Illinois, Northwest Indiana, and Southwest Michigan. So those are kind of the areas that the greater Chicago region supports. Our foundation is deeply involved in digital equity with our Internet Essentials program. We want organizations that are inspiring young people to explore fields in STEM, business awareness and education. We're also supporting, more inclusive and equitable society. So, our foundation's supporting social justice and organizations that are working to eradicate injustice and inequality. So those are kind of the things that we focus on. Some of the our foray into that is working with organizations with our Volunteer Day of Service. That's kind of how we get organizations engaged with us, and leading to the road of sponsorship and potentially foundation grants.
Great, thanks, Gwen. Claire?
Yeah, Claire Butterfield with the Christopher Family Foundation, which is, as the name implies, the personal philanthropy of the Christopher family, which is the family that founded the Pampered Chef Company. We are based in Hinsdale, although most of our funding is directed to Chicago and particularly the west side of Chicago. We fund education, employment and entrepreneurship, and individual and family health and well-being, and community and fellowship, the fourth bucket being largely the faith-based funding of the family, who are from the Lutheran tradition. Our individual and family health and well-being funding is largely focused on access to healthy food. and the others I think are more obvious. And we have been working most recently on trying to build a strategy that's more place-based and focused specifically on the neighborhood of Austin on Chicago's West Side.
Great, thank you, Claire. So before we launch into our panel discussion, I just would like to point out that as many of you may have seen as development professionals, this week the new Giving USA publication was put out, and Giving USA essentially is the longest running annual report on charitable giving. It breaks out charitable giving into various categories based on where the funds are going, as well as where the funds come from. So before I get started, I'd like to just do one more quick poll, and just to see our audience kind of knowledge on where funding comes from. So I know we're going to be talking today about foundation giving. So according to Giving USA, what percentage of nonprofit funding comes from foundations? So if everyone could just respond to that to the best of your knowledge, or maybe you've seen the recent Giving USA report and know the answer to this question. Okay, I'll just give it a couple more seconds so everyone can get their response in. Okay, so Giving USA reports that about 17% of giving to charities comes from foundations. So 60% of you got that right, between 10 and 30%. 5% comes from corporations, 10% comes from bequests, but the largest, by far the largest source of charitable giving is individuals at 69%. You include that with bequests, and you could even make the case that some family foundation giving is directed by individuals. That's really where the focus should be when it comes to your annual development plan. So I know today we're going to be talking about foundations and grant making, but I just wanted to point that out, just that grant making is and foundation giving is just one piece of an overall development strategy. Okay, just a reminder, if anyone has questions throughout the conversation, please put those into the Q&A. If you have technical issues, please pop that in the chat. So I'll go ahead and get us started. And I know this has been a really tough couple months for everyone in the nonprofit sector. We have, obviously, we have a couple things going on with the current pandemic, as well as heightened awareness of systemic racism and racial injustice happening in our communities, which hopefully will result in significant and permanent change in our society. So I wanted to start with that and put this out to our panelists. How has your grant making changed, or how has it been adjusted as a result of these two major things that are happening in our society right now? Gwendolyn, I know you touched a little bit on Comcast initiatives with Internet Essentials and your focus on social justice. So if you wouldn't mind getting us started.
Sure. So, fortunately, we haven't had to make too many adjustments because we were already funding digital equity and diversity and inclusion. So, so that just gave us an opportunity with this pandemic to sort of expand some of the things that we were already doing, and giving more families an opportunity to, learn the importance of broadband adoption. So, this pandemic has just, shined a brighter light on some of the disparities that were already happening. So, so that, gave our Internet Essentials program, an opportunity to get into the homes of more people, and then, it's just become even more important to some of the families that we're serving.
Tom, did you want to add anything?
Sure. So the COVID pandemic hit for us in the midst of our spring grant cycle. And in response, we held all of our site visits virtually, of course, and also moved up the timeline of our process. So usually our board meets the end of June, and that's when all funding decisions were made. We substantially accelerated the process. Our board met back on May 5th, and that's when all the funding decisions were made for our spring grant cycle so that we could get grant dollars to our grantees sooner. We also moved some things around and found an additional $250,000 for a special COVID response fund in COVID response funding for our grantees, and had a very quick accelerated application process for that as well. In terms of racial and health equity is one of our funding priorities. We have always tried to be very attuned to various social determinants of health, including those that have their foundation in race. We are trying to do a lot of listening to our grantees and to our communities about what this moment means to all of us and what it could mean and should mean for our foundation.
Claire, I had read in the Christopher Family Foundation newsletter about some of the efforts the foundation has embarked on to respond during these times. Did you want to expand a little bit on that?
Sure. Yeah. Much like Tom, we've responded initially with flexibility to our existing grantees and altering reporting expectations. And we know you're not going to meet your program goals for the year, and it's okay. We switched a lot of grants retroactively to general operating. In addition, we've made some additional donations to some of the collaborative funds for COVID response, the Fund for Education Equity at the Chicago Community Trust, and then the larger Chicago COVID-19 Response Fund. And we do think that our focus on Austin, we're kind of picking up the pace on that. It seems that a response that would make healthy food more readily available in the Austin community is more important now because access to grocery stores was diminished in the immediate aftermath of the Floyd killing.
And then I'll just add to what the other panelists said at the Top for Family Foundation. We and our board actually increased our grant making budget this year by $1 million. So we increased it by 50%. And that was split half and half between our Austin geographic area and our Chicago area to specifically address the needs around COVID. Similar to Claire and Tom, we've also offered our grantees a little flexibility in terms of when applications come in, when final reports come in, and tried to get those funds out into the communities as soon as possible. In regards to the social justice issues, we're doing a lot of listening. We're trying to figure out the best way to respond. We initially have doubled our grants to 2 organizations that work primarily with communities of color. And we're also trying to focus on organizations that are led by folks that have lived experience. We're hearing that a lot in the conversations that are happening in the community. A question that comes up a lot is, a lot of foundations are becoming more strategic with their giving. And there's also, and this isn't a new thing, but there are also a lot of foundations who don't accept unsolicited proposals. So a question that nonprofit and development folks will often have is, well, if those foundations aren't accepting solicited proposals, how do you even get on foundations' radars? So I'm not sure who wants to start with a response. I see Tom has taken himself off mute, so we'll start with you, Tom.
So we still accept unsolicited proposals, and we likely always will. We have a responsive grants program that anyone can submit a letter of intent for, and we regularly get several new organizations applying to us each cycle. The letter of intent process probably is, and we can talk more about that later, probably is the best way to get on our radar through our general application process. We're not against kind of answering the phone and telling you a little bit about our foundation and hearing a little bit about your organization as well. But the letter of intent process provides us with a way to kind of get to know an organization, make sure there's a fit, make sure you're serving people in our geography. And we see that as a way to kind of keep our ear to the ground about what's really going on in our communities and what's really going on, in the nonprofit organizations that are serving our communities. So I don't see us kind of moving away from having a responsive grant program as part of what we do.
Gwen, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, so our foundation does not accept unsolicited proposals. You have to be invited to submit. And, I would just say that, one of the ways that we sort of, invite people into, partnering with us is through some of the community-based programs that we have, like Internet Essentials or our Volunteer Day of Service. That's kind of the way that we do an intro of the organization to us, and just to see how we work with one another. The other thing I would say, for organizations is to do your research, especially if the organization is not accepting unsolicited proposals. Make sure that you're giving the organization, when you're having these conversations, something that that they care about. You don't want to just be arbitrarily talking to organizations that don't support what you support. So making sure that you're doing the you're doing your research, you're doing your due diligence, and that this organization supports veterans and this is what my program is, versus this organization, supports veterans and, I have, something to do with animals. Just make sure that, your goals are aligned.
Anything to add?
Yeah, we also accept unsolicited applications as letters of inquiry in our 2 grant cycles each year. We really appreciate it if you read our website first. It helps a lot, and you're less likely to make us cranky. Although we try never to be cranky if you're just doing your job. And I also think there are some places where you can informally network with folks from foundations, Chicago Women in Philanthropy being one good example of that. I'm also on the board of that. It's a no pitch zone, but it's a place to get to know the folks who are doing the grant making informally, and you can always ask to meet for coffee later.
I think that's great. And I'd also recommend, I feel like Family Foundation giving mirrors individual giving quite a bit, and that personal connections, also are important. So, reaching out to your staff and your board to see if they have any personal connections. Like Gwendolyn and Claire mentioned, make sure there is an alignment and there is mutual interest there first. But that would be a good source of starting to establish those personal connections and getting on those foundations' radars. So when an organization is looking to apply to a foundation, how should the agency determine what an appropriate request is? As funders, do you look at the request size based on the size of the overall organization's budget? Do you fund a percentage of a project budget? Or are you just looking at the size of the request itself? I'd like to get us started.
I'll be happy to start on that one. We look at all 3. We generally don't want to be 100% supporting on any project. We will decline to be the sole support of a staff position because we have found historically that the staff positions don't last once our support drops out. But we will sometimes pick up 100% of the cost if you have a special initiative where you're bringing in a consultant or doing an evaluation project, where you really just need some specialized dollars to take a good look at your programs. In that case, we are willing to pick up 100% of the tab.
Tom?
One thing I would suggest is really, in all cases, do your homework on the foundation, right? So before you approach us, take a look at who we have funded in the past, what levels we have funded, and who we give to and in what amount. Key for us would be, how many people are you serving from our communities, and what is the cost of your services? What's the unit cost? So how much does it cost to serve those people, and what are you asking us, and what does that relationship look like? We do look at the agency budget as well as the size of the request, but what we're looking for is a rationale for why you're asking for this amount, which is grounded in some data. So if counseling costs, a couple $100 per session, and you're serving 6 people from our communities, how much are you asking us of that? How much can you get from insurance or from Medicaid, and what is the gap that you're trying to fill, and who else is funding this?
And just to add to that, Tom took my answer, but but we definitely, we definitely want you to do your homework. We definitely want whatever you bring to us to be supported, by data, and that can be proven. We want the organizations that we're working with, obviously, to be proven sources of results and reputable. And we want to work with organizations that have programs that can demonstrate community impact, because that's kind of one of the things that that our foundation is after. We want to make an impact in the community, so we want to work with organizations that are making those impacts.
Great. And the other thing I want to mention is, as a development person, also make sure that keep in mind the cost it takes for your organization to complete the proposal versus how much you will potentially give back in a grant award. So if it's a very small amount, if it's a $500 grant or maybe a $1,000 grant, it honestly might not be worth your time to go after that. So just keep that in mind as you're doing your research, and always feel free, if there is a program officer or someone you can talk to, I would recommend reaching out to that person and asking for some advice on the request amount. So that said, how often, as funders, how often do you want to hear from your grantees? And in what way do you prefer to be communicated with? Let's start with you, Tom.
So we have a fairly open relationship with our grantees. I mean, it doesn't bother me to get emails or calls from our grantees with kind of updates on the program. That being said, there are some times when we really do want to hear from an organization, and those are largely if there are like major turnovers in staff, particularly at the executive director level, the program director level, or if there are substantial changes that will impact the grant outcomes. So if you are having difficulty meeting the grant outcomes, it would be good to know about that before the final report. Or if you're having trouble, sometimes I'm in a position to, help an organization connect with other organizations in our region, which could, help substantially increase your numbers or increase recruitment, or I could play that role. So, knowing about difficulties before the end of the grant report is always good. But then again, you're not going to bother me by dropping me an email, letting me know how things are going. But we do definitely want to hear from you kind of at the time of your final report. Please don't have your reports be late. And then if there's any substantial changes that will impact the outcome of the grant.
I can just add to that. I saw a question in the chat, which was what the name of the organization was, and Claire and I are both on the board. So it's Chicago Women in Philanthropy, just so you know. And we call it affectionately CWIP. So, but to answer the question, you know, what we don't want is, you know, to hear from, you know, organizations that we're supporting, you know, once a year, you know, the time when their report's going to be due, or, you know, like, you know, they have a sponsorship coming up and, you know, and they want dollars. We don't want to hear from, you know, the people that we're supporting, you know, only at that time when they need something or they need money from us. We want, you know, the relationship and the partnership to be meaningful for both of us. And, you know, we want it to be a two-way street of communication, and we want it to last throughout the year.
Yeah, I would second that. We love hearing from our grantees. We want you to put us on your mailing list. We want to see your newsletters. If you have good news to share, we would love to get that before the report is due. If you have bad news to share, we want the relationship to be strong enough that you absolutely know you can come and tell us what's really going on, and ideally before we hear it from somebody else. And we love to be invited to things, but please don't take it personally if we don't attend everybody's events.
Great. I think it's a good segue into our next question. I think we touched on a couple of these things in our responses. What is it that grantees do really well? And what do they do, or what don't they do that is frustrating? I know we talked a little bit about late reports and potentially not communicating major organizational changes. So is there anything else that you all would add on, you know, what they do well and what grantees could improve upon? I'll start with you, Gwen.
Oops, almost forgot to take myself off mute. You know, I think organizations that are providing, you know, real outcomes, truly reporting on, what happened during the grant period, making sure that, they're demonstrating how their impact, was made on the community. I think that's what, a lot of grantees do well, and demonstrating how, engaging how their, effective is with the, the foundation's impact. But, I would just echo the thing that I find frustrating are reports that are late, low quality, or, you have results and data that, have no numbers to back it up. We want, because we're taking these numbers and then reporting it to our, people and, our, bosses. So we want to make sure that the numbers that we get, are really making some change. And if you can't do that, like Claire said, we need to know that as well.
Tom, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to start with the first part. What are grantees doing well? And at this point, I just like to lift up grantees are amazing, especially in this time. Nonprofits, all of you who work for nonprofits are just incredible. What you are doing now to kind of help our communities and help the people in our communities who've been affected not only by COVID, but by the economy and by all of the things that are going on in our world right now. And yet nonprofits really have done an amazing job at, serving our communities. And so we can talk about grants and grant writing and proposals and all that, but it would be really remiss if we don't just lift up the nonprofit community for the incredible work that they're doing. So moving into, proposals and grant writing and what grantees do well and what frustrates me as a program officer, I love it when applications are clear, when I can understand what it is you do, the issue that you are focused on, the problem you are addressing, the services you're providing, and the outcomes you hope to achieve. What often I find is some organizations are very good at describing the problem they are addressing and why it's important to fund them, but they are less good at describing what they are actually doing or what they want money for. And that is often frustrating. It is also often frustrating when I read proposals that at the end of it, I don't understand what they're asking for or what they mean. And so often sometimes I receive proposals with a lot of jargon or acronyms. I am not necessarily in your field, even though I've been in philanthropy for almost 20 years. I may not understand your culture, your language, your acronyms. So it might be good to kind of have someone, either your spouse, significant other, a friend who is not in your organization, read through your application to see if they understand it. Because if they don't understand it, I might not either, and my board might not. And so, that, and I also really like it when it's very clear what you're asking for, because I have to condense a little inside baseball. I have to condense maybe a 9 or 10 page application into 2 pages for my board. And the applications that I really love are ones that make it very easy for me to do, that I can cut and paste. This is what the issue is. This is what they are doing. And this is what the outcomes that they expect to achieve by what they're doing. And, the frustration comes when I have to work really hard even to understand an application to be able to do that.
Claire, did you want to add anything?
Just a few things. First of all, amen to what Tom said. We think our grantees are doing wonderful work, and that's why they're our grantees. So they do so many things well. And also some of the areas that we fund, we're funding issues that are really hard. They're really hard to affect. And so we know that if things don't sometimes go as planned, it's because the issue you're trying to work on is difficult. And so one of the things that grantees can be shy about is sharing that they're struggling. And I really would love to encourage grantees to never hesitate to have a strong enough relationship with program folks at foundations to say, we're struggling with this and here's why we think we're struggling. A lot of folks who work at foundations used to be program people, and we know the work you do is hard. And then the other thing is, please do read the website, read the directions. We really would appreciate that. We have cycles when we would like to receive things. It's just a little irksome when they come in outside those cycles. And we would love to have you touch base with us by phone or email before you submit an application. So believe what it says on the website.
Yeah, and I'll just expand a little bit on what Claire said by offering a specific example. I know it is difficult at times for grantees to be fully transparent with funders, particularly when things don't go well. We had one of our long-term grantees, one of my very first site visits actually after I started with the Top for Family Foundation. And the program that we were funding just, it wasn't getting the results they expected. There weren't enough people that were signing up for this program. So they brought us in and we had a very candid conversation about shifting our support to a different program where they were seeing a lot of need. They were seeing some really great results, and we were more than happy to do that. This other program did also fall within our giving priorities, so it made sense philanthropically to do that. So I would encourage grantees to, as much as you can, as much as you're comfortable with, have those honest, candid conversations with your funders, because like everyone said, you guys are amazing. I've seen some really impressive, particularly in the past few months, ways that you all have pivoted your services and reached out to communities in need. So the work that you all do is very impressive. So that said, how do you all as funders, Claire, Tom, and Gwen, how do you address evaluation and outcome measurement. And you can speak to this either from your work within your organization, how you evaluate whether your organization is effective, or how you work with your grantees to help them evaluate their programs. So who'd like to get us started? Let's start with you, Gwen.
I'm talking, but
I saw you talking.
you know, I think obviously the bottom line is outcomes are important, and we want to see them, and that's, you know, and that goes, you know, both ways, whether or not they turned out like you thought they were going to turn out, or they didn't turn out like you thought they were going to turn out. You know, we want to know how the dollars were used. We want, you know, to have them presented to us in, you know, a measurable way. And we also, want, the organizations that we're working with to, just be accountable for their outcomes. Sometimes not everything doesn't go the way you expect it to go. But we know that, the organizations and the programs that we're supporting are making a difference in the community. And that's what, that's what we want to see on the page. We want to see things like, case studies, and we want to see testimonials. Those are really good things for us, to sort of have. So then when we're going back to, to report to, our own internal people, we can say, look, this person in this program, this is what, our dollars have done. This is how this has been, effective. And, so we want to see real people, in addition to the actual data.
Yeah, so Kathy, you're on mute, but I think you asked me to move forward. So I would echo everything Gwen just said. I mean, I think that we often rely on our grantees to talk about what the appropriate outcomes are for their particular services or programs that they're providing. We do look for kind of research-based programs and standardized kind of measures of success. But essentially, kind of the question that we're asking in our applications and our site visits is, what does success look like for this program? How are you determining the impact of this? We have had some conversations with a few of our grantees that are doing similar work around common outcomes across organizations, particularly around diabetes in the last year, which is a common outcome that is across several different organizations that are providing access to health. But again, I mean, it's looking at how we can make an impact in moving our region to be the healthiest region in the country. And we have developed some indicators and some ideas about what that looks like. And we have a whole data dashboard on our website that is a wealth of information about not only demographics, but key health indicators for our region that we refer to and encourage our grantees to refer to in looking at their own programs and their own organizations and the populations that they're serving. So yeah, I don't pretend to think that we, pretend to say that we have this by any means nailed down. Evaluation, they're all in a learning process, foundations included, about what it means and how we can best assess impact in ways that are realistic, in ways that are meaningful not only to us, but to our grantees and to the communities that we all serve.
Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just support what Tom and Gwen both said. We're looking for a mix of anecdote and data. We're looking to understand the so what of what you do. We want to know what your inputs were, but we'd really like to know what the outcomes were as a result of them. And sometimes we're willing to accept an educated hypothesis about what the outcomes are because of what the inputs were. If you're a food bank and you gave away X tons of food, we figure kids are healthier. You know, you don't need to be able to drill down and demonstrate that. But that's what we're looking for, is what's different because of the work that you're doing, and how is the world better?
Thank you. I want to note that if people have questions as we're going through this conversation, we're going to hold all the Q&A until the end. And I do want to be able to allow enough time for that. I saw one question come up in the Q&A about partnerships, and that actually was my very next question to pose to the panelists. So that's good timing. So foundations often ask about partnerships and collaborations with other nonprofits. How and why are partnerships important to you as a funder? Tom, did you want to get us started on that one?
Sure. So partnerships are important to us really because the big problems that we're trying to address, be they health equity, access to healthcare, domestic violence, racial equity, they really can't be solved by just one organization. Partnerships show that you're embedded in our communities, that you're part of the tapestry of the organizations that are working to address the challenges facing our communities. And so, you know, we do look for kind of who are you working for, working with, what do those relationships look like? And we have often played a role in kind of helping to connect organizations in our communities. That's actually a really fun job that I get to do, right? I mean, foundations often get this, 20,000 foot view. And if there's an organization that's working on, an issue around homelessness prevention or mental health, and they might not be as familiar with the other organizations that we fund that are also working in that area, it's very simple for me to kind of play that convener role and connector role to connect those organizations.
Great. Claire, Gwen, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I would just, I would echo what he said. And, partnerships are, really key to community impact. And I think, not only, is it an opportunity for us to, make those introductions. I've met a lot of organizations that I've later partnered with through some of those, community partnerships that we have. So, like it's that same two-way street. We want to work with organizations that have that shared vision, and we want to be with organizations that we can highlight that their activities and interests, and all be working together to make that community impact.
And I would also add that we're interested in how you play in the space that you operate in, and how you work with others. So your collaboration with other organizations matters to us, because we want to know that you are by nature collaborative, because our organizations that we fund are taking on big problems that can't be solved by one organization. We also would love to see the equity of your relationships if you are an organization that is not staffed by the affected members of the affected community, how you're relating to organizations that are, and to make sure that if you're in a collaborative that is funded, that the funding is being shared equitably, and that leadership is being shared. Because there are too many examples of white-led organizations claiming representation of communities of color and then not sharing funds equitably.
Thanks, Claire. I think I'm going to combine the next couple questions into one. How important is your relationship with the organization and its leaders when you make grants? And then do you also look to see which other funders and foundations are supporting those organizations before you fund them? So, how important is it? How important is that relationship? And also, how important is it that you see it that other funders are supporting those organizations? Tom, do you want to get us started on that one?
Sure. So I think what's important, I mean, certainly our foundation has very strong relationships with the leadership of most of our grantees. I live in our community, one of the communities that we fund. I often see executive directors when I'm shopping in Costco, right? I mean, it's just a nature of the kind of foundation we are. That being said, I mean, I think what's more important from a grant perspective is that there is leadership in the organization. So leadership not being housed necessarily in one person only, but that we have leaderful organizations, and that organizations have the capacity and the flexibility and the agility to carry out the programs and the services that are going to improve the health of our region. So, it's good to have strong relationships, but we sometimes decline organizations that we have strong relationships with if the program is not a fit, or if it's a competitive process. If there are other organizations that are making a better case for moving the foundation's mission forward in this particular grant cycle, for example. What was the second part of the question, Kathy? I'm sorry.
How important is it that you see other funders support?
Oh, yeah. So we love when other funders are supporting our grantees. For a couple of reasons. One, it shows that there is, potentially more sustainability for the program that we are funding. It also acts as a check. So if another foundation, if you've gone through another foundation's grant process, there's an extra layer of due diligence. So it shows that, you have gone through their process as well. And we know we have strong relationships with our peers as well. So I'm very familiar with the process that a couple of our other foundation partners put their grantees through. That being said, again, because we are a very geographically defined foundation, there are cases where we are, one of a few foundations that have funded a given project. And if that's important to us, given kind of our geography and the health of our area, we still might fund it even if other foundations have not yet.
Great. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for Q&A at the end. So, but there are two more questions I'd like to pose to the panelists before we get into Q&A. One is, how important are an organization's financials in your funding decision? So Gwen, do you want to get us started on that one?
Sure. So we do our due diligence, we do our research, just like we're asking the organizations to do. And we only fund programs that are in existence. So if you came to our foundation with a new program, that's not something we would be looking into funding. So we want to look at existing programs that sort of have a track record of proven results and sustainability, because we don't want to fund something that at the end of the year is not going to be in existence. So that's kind of one of the checks and balances that we have, and we also just want to make sure that all of the dollars that we're putting out into the community are going to have a impact and staying in the community.
Claire?
Yeah, the financials, they matter, and your apparent understanding of them matters. They're a measure of risk for us as a foundation, and so we will be concerned if you have year-over-year deficits overall or in a program. That doesn't necessarily mean that we won't fund you, but we want a really good story about what's going on and what the plan is to correct that. And if you're a new organization or new to us and your finances are opaque, interdepartmental transfers and things that seem to be masking deficits, we probably aren't going to start a relationship with you.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so like others, we have a financial assessment and financial thresholds that we use as part of our decision-making process. And like others, an organization with really bad problems on their audit, or, from their P&Ls, we can tell they probably might have difficulty making payroll. They're probably not going to get a grant from us. And those are hard conversations to have, but we do, we do our due diligence when it comes to finances as well as kind of the program piece, to make sure that we are funding organizations that that can complete the grant and are viable.
Yeah, I would echo what Tom said. For our foundation, we tend to look at audited financials since those are an independent assessment of financial stability. Some red flags we look for when it comes to financials are 3+ years of operating deficits. If we see the organization is selling off any assets, if we see they're continually pulling money from their line of credit. So, one of those things doesn't necessarily mean they won't get a grant, but if we're continually seeing those red flags, then we start to have those tough questions with our grantees. One last question before we get into some of our Q&A. As funders, there's been a lot of talk in philanthropy recently about multi-year funding and shifting program support into general operating support. So what is your opinion and your organization's opinion on multi-year funding and general operating support? Tom, I'll turn it to you since you're already off mute.
So we don't typically do multi-year grants, although we have had relationships with the same grantees for many, many years. We do offer general op. That is, something that organizations can apply for. We believe in funding the mission of our organization. I mean, we would still ask questions around how many people are from our communities are you serving, and how are you moving our mission forward. But again, I think the question is less about what exactly are you going to use the dollars for, and more about what impact are you going to have in our communities. And whether that's a program grant or a general op grant, to me, sometimes that line can get a bit fuzzy. So you can use the money for what you're going to use it for, but there still should be you should let us know how you're making a difference and making an impact on the health of our communities.
Claire or Gwen, anything to add?
Yeah, so we do very little few multi-year grants. Kind of similar to Tom, we have grantees that we have funded multiple years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're in a multi-year grant. We also don't generally provide any general operating support and staff time. That's not really things that we fund. So we're, like I said, our focus is more on existing programs and single year grants and, reviewing at the end and to see if we're going to move forward again.
Yeah, and I will add that we also do a mix of program and general operating support, and generally 1 year at a time. And I'm going to add something actually useful that a program officer said to me a long time ago that I didn't understand until she told me, and that is that foundations exist for their own purposes, not solely to support the purposes of the organizations they fund. And in the case of family foundations, one of our purposes is to allow the family to engage in philanthropy together as a family, which means they prefer to do 1 year at a time because it allows them to get together again and talk about the work that's happening with their dollars. So you just have to recognize that we're trying to meet internal goals of of philanthropy and good-heartedness and generosity and time together for our family and the external goals of supporting the work of our grantees.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. I know we have a lot of questions that are coming in to the Q&A, and Kate has been monitoring those. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kate to take some of the questions from our attendees.
Thanks so much. Thank you. This is really helpful. I think some of the questions that have been answered have been maybe touched on, but not completely vetted for what the attendees asked. A handful of questions were specific around response to COVID and the pandemic. Most of them being, what's next? Do you see a switch to, and I'm going to ask two or three questions kind of together because I think that's applicable. Do you see a switch to general operating grants beyond the pandemic? Will the condensed timing be consistent? Will you switch back to the old timing, or will the more condensed timing stick? And we'll start with those two. Those two are a little different.
Great.
I'm the only one off mute, so I'll start again. So I'm not sure I have an answer yet about what the future looks like. I think we, like all of you, are trying to figure out what the new world looks like in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and what our own work and what our own way to be most impactful to our communities and grantees looks like moving forward. We were able, I mentioned that we accelerated the timeline of our application process. We were able to do that for a variety of reasons, in part because, you know, all of us were working from home and a lot of other things had been canceled, right? So all of us on staff were supposed to go to a bunch of conferences also in the midst of our, you know, grant cycle. All of those were canceled or moved online, which freed up time and ability and bandwidth to be able to focus on our responsive grant cycle and really push things forward. What that will look like moving forward, what our own bandwidth will look like moving forward, is hard for me to predict at this moment in time. Certainly, I think we are learning about ways that we can work differently. And so I do suspect that there will be some changes in how we work. But, you know, I'm not able to look into a crystal ball, even in terms of, you know, our own portfolio and how much money we have to give away given the economy, and what that will all look like moving forward. We can commit to listening and learning and trying to be as effective and responsive as we can to not only our grantees, but the situation that we all find ourselves in.
We did some emergency grant making out of our cycle, and we are just watching our grantees specifically and the collaborative funds also, just to see if we want to do some additional outside the cycle grant making. But generally, we're sticking to our calendar. We are very open for the rest of this year at a minimum to general operating requests and very flexible reporting. We understand that the goal this year is survival, and next year maybe, when we see where we are with vaccines and that sort of thing, and maybe we get back to specific program goals.
Yeah, and our focus, hasn't been a general operating. So we're keeping our focus on digital equity. We're actually, working with, and engaging nonprofits in other ways through some of our media opportunities and things like that. So we're working with them on that level versus, actual dollars. So, so we're, talking to our partners about, those types of things versus trying to support them with general operating dollars, which is not something that falls into what we support.
And one last COVID question. So as you're looking at the grant cycles that are coming up, many of us aren't necessarily COVID specific, basic needs, healthcare, research, food insecurity. How much do you want to see mention of or inclusion of the impact of COVID on the organization in grant proposals that are maybe looking ahead to next year when none of us know what the impact will still remain?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with that one. I think that I think it's extremely important to mention. I think not to mention it would, is ignoring this big elephant in the room that has impacted your organization. So, we as a foundation are being very flexible on, outcomes and things like that. We understand that, this year and maybe next year is an anomaly, and you might not meet the goals that you set. So, yeah, I think I would expect to see mention of COVID in, in near term and even medium and long term applications and reporting.
Thank you. So speaking of timely things, one of the questions was, as funders, do you anticipate changes to your reporting questions or outcomes, or I would say even your grant processes relating to racial equity, diversity?
Kate, you're cutting out just a little bit. Can you state that question again?
Plug came out. Speaking of timely issues, do you anticipate changes to your reporting, grant process, or outcome measures that you'll want to see relating to diversity, equity, inclusion, with all the discussions around social justice and racial equity right now?
Yeah, we say that we run all of our grant reviews through a lens of access and equity. So I hope we were already looking at that, and we will be looking at it more carefully, more humbly, and more critically going forward.
Yeah, and for us, that's, kind of falls in line with what we're already doing. So we're going to continue to do that and look at digital equity and social justice and inequality. I would assume that it's probably even going to be heightened even more, going forward. So, just expect, one of the things that we've always done is, take a look at the board of the organizations. We want, in addition to the clients that are being served, we want the board and the staff to reflect who they're serving. So we're looking at that too. So that's always a question that we're asking. So just keep that in mind when you're approaching foundations, that we are looking at the diversity of your board. We're looking at the diversity of your staff, in addition to the clients that you're serving.
I would echo what my colleague said. We ask questions about board diversity as well. And we also try to look at health equity as a lens and social determinants of health as a lens, as one of the things that we look at in our funding. And I imagine those conversations will be even more robust moving forward.
Thank you. A lot of questions about communication, and you all touched on a little bit how you like to be communicated with and keeping consistent communication. However, with the changes in our world right now, what are your suggestions for how to best communicate with you, since you can't meet for coffee, you can't do site visits? What virtual opportunities are there? And if it's a new funder, obviously, we always say pick up the phone and call, but how open are you to those calls? How does that need to change now that we are in this Zoom world?
You can still pick up the phone and, sorry.
No, go ahead, Claire.
We're glad for you to pick up the phone and call us. I'm very happy to hear from grantees through electronic means, and we sadly had to do all our site visits for the current cycle via Zoom this year. Not how we like to do things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the rest of you, we've been doing a lot of Zoom calls lately. We actually reached out to all of our grantees when the pandemic first began to kind of get an assessment of changes and what they were dealing with. And then particularly our second quarter grantees, which was the cycle that kind of fell within this COVID timeframe. We had a little more extensive follow-up with them. So, you know, I would say we're very open to those conversations. We want to know what's going on. We want to know what challenges you're experiencing, and we want to help if we can.
What about,
I would echo everything that was said. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
no. What about for new potential partners? Is that exploratory call still welcome, or are you maybe, I think you all had said that you were open to unsolicited proposals, but from your practice with other foundations or colleagues that you know in that sector, is that still a welcome practice, and is that the best way to start?
Well, I just want to clarify, we do not accept unsolicited proposals, just to be clear. But yeah, you know, we're definitely open to having those conversations and seeing what you're doing. And even if, you know, it's not dollars that we're able to give you, you know, like we're still able, you know, to talk to you, and maybe somewhere down the line, you know, we can support you in some way. So we definitely want those conversations.
Yeah, we're in the same situation as Gwen. We are currently not accepting unsolicited proposals for the Chicago area, and we haven't for a number of years, but we do accept inquiries via email, and we do look at those on a quarterly basis. Our specific COVID funds that we have, we decided those are going to go to existing grantees. But our regular grant pool, you know, we're open to receiving inquiries. And then if staff or board is interested in that organization, then we follow up with that organization.
Great. Lots of questions about what's a good fit and how to be funded. So I'll start with kind of a combination of a few. How do you feel about funding the running of programs? You know, a number of people made mention of, you know, they do direct service, so the salaries of their staff are the program cost, but some funders really shy away and say they won't pay for salaries. And how do you work with the funder to understand that that is the program cost, and is there an opportunity to do that? And that dribbles into kind of the conversation of overhead and what your acceptable limits are and that kind of thing.
I would like to address this one. So we had a request several years ago from a grantee of ours that provides domestic violence services, and they came in, been funding them for several years for counseling for domestic violence. And about the third year that we funded them, they came in with kind of an interesting request. They said, we would like funding to support the salary of a receptionist. And I'm like, okay, why? I said, well, because right now our counselors are answering the telephone. And if we had a receptionist, we could increase our counseling hours by 20%, which means we could increase the number of people served by, you know, I forget what the number was. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's great. Like, more people in our communities could receive support. More people in our communities who are experiencing domestic violence could receive support. So we gave the grant. And the outcomes were not around kind of how many calls the secretary answered, but how many more people from our communities were served and what the clinical outcomes were around that. So I'm a big proponent that I think whatever the dollars actually get paid for, whether it be the electric bill, whether it be, you know, a salary for a counselor or whatever, you know, foundations should focus on outcomes, and what outcomes are we all working for to move our missions forward. And so that's kind of the, you know, I mean, obviously that's a broad stroke, the statements I've just made, and there's a lot more discussion that goes into that. But I think that, you know, our mission is to improve the health and well-being of those who live and work in our communities. How are you going to do that? What does that look like? And, you know, that is what we would be focused on more than, are you going to use the money for this thing or that thing in particular?
Else? Okay. How Mm. How will you view organizations that utilize the PPP loan? Will that impact your consideration of funding of them at all?
Good for you if you got PPP funding. And we know that that will change in the case of some of our existing grantees, it may mean that they push out the deadline for the grant we gave them further because they need to burn their PPP loan first. We're just totally flexible about that. And good on you if you got some.
Yeah, I would echo that, what Claire said. You know, we definitely are not punitive to any organizations who applied for PPP. I think it's great if they got PPP, and it, you know, it only helps to bolster that organization.
Saw that one pop up towards the bottom, and I wanted to make sure to ask. Some fun questions. What is an example of an effective impact report you've seen?
You know, it's like I said, we want to see actual people and, you know, the impact that it's made on their lives. So we want to have those testimonials from clients, case studies. You know, like I like to see, you know, things written, but, you know, like video testimonials are great. You know, we just want to see that, so then we are able to, you know, use that internally and, you know, sort of bolster our support for these organizations. So we want to, you know, we want something tangible.
Yeah, and I would echo that as well. I think that a good impact report includes both anecdotal and qualitative measurements. You know, sometimes I'll call out one grantee who did a great job of this, was Big Brothers Big Sisters. You know, everyone's pivoting to virtual programming, and they're doing virtual match support. Even the initial introduction, they are doing via Zoom. So they were able to get permission to share that, and they shared that with us. You know, the big meeting the little for the very first time, and it was kind of cool to see that, and I shared that with my board. But that's, you know, an anecdotal story they shared. We have another grantee who sends me quarterly, who sends probably all of their funders and supporters quarterly reports against a dashboard that they've developed. It's a job training program. So, you know, the increase in salaries of the program participants for that quarter, and how many people got jobs and what percentage got jobs. So that's also interesting data to have. So I think a combination of those anecdotal stories and then those qualitative and quantitative measurements are good, because I also have board members who are interested in seeing both of those. There was a couple questions about the types of programs you want to fund. I'm not going to go into that one with all of you, because I think the deference would be to look at your priorities. What's the number one reason you won't fund an organization? What red flags do you look for?
When I look at a grant proposal, there are really four things that I'm looking for, four buckets of questions that I have. One is kind of an overarching question of, does it move our mission forward? So are you serving people from our communities, and how are you improving health? And, you know, we're probably not going to fund an arts organization or an organization strictly focused on education. We're a health foundation. So how is it health? I mean, that would be the number one reason why, you know, you wouldn't get funding from us, is if you just don't meet our mission or are not serving our communities. Second set of questions are, you know, essentially under the bucket of, is it a good program? So, you know, does it follow best practices? Is it, you know, research-based? Looking at the program, is it really going to accomplish what you say it's going to accomplish? All those sets of questions would be really important. The third bucket of questions are really around capacity. Do you have the capacity to carry it off? You can have the best program idea in the world, but if you don't have the staff, the resources, the finances, this is where all the financial questions come in, the leadership, to be able to carry this program off, you're probably not going to get funded from us. And the last question really is one that's really internal to the foundation, is given all that all the applications that we receive in a given cycle, is this program that you're asking us for, this request you're asking us for, the best use of our assets in this period of time? And that's just a reflection that our grant cycles are competitive, and our board has to make some difficult decisions, often between very good programs. And so you answer all of those 4 questions. You are meeting our mission. You do have a high quality program that has high quality outcomes. You have the capacity to carry it off with strong finances, strong leadership, staff capable of carrying out the program, and you are meeting health and moving our mission forward in a way better than some others, unfortunately, or in a way that fits the budget that we have for that particular grant cycle, you will get funded.
And I think for us, you know, you have to be invited. So you have to fall within our guidelines for you to be invited. So that sort of takes, you know, some of the guesswork out of it. And we're going to, you know, have a conversation with you, and, you know, you're going to be, you know, the program and the organization are going through a vet process before anything is put to paper.
All right, I think we are right at 10 o'clock. So I'm sorry that we didn't get to everyone's questions. I think this was a really robust, great conversation. So we appreciate all the questions that did come in. I want to thank our panelists for participating today and your honest and candid responses. Just a reminder, when you close out of this Zoom call, you will be directed to a survey. Please fill that out so we can get your feedback on this program and future programs. All WSPN members, we will be having our annual meeting on June 30th from 4 to 4:45 p.m. You should have received an email about it. I'm sure you will receive a few more emails about it, where we will vote on next year's slate of officers and changes to the bylaws. And then stay tuned for next year's slate of programs. Our program committee will be working on that. In next week, I believe we'll be talking about it. And it may be a combination of virtual and in-person, depending on where we are. But please keep your eyes peeled for those programs for next year. So anything else to add, Kate?
No, thank you again, Kathy and panelists, and all of you for the great questions. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all of them, but please, members, register and attend the annual meeting, as Kathy said. But again, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.